محمد وآل محمد صلوات. محفظہ بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں. محفظہ بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں. کیسا ہے یہ چراگاہ، کیسا ہے یہ چراگاہ، دل ڈوبے جا رہے ہیں. کیا شام آ گیا ہے. محفظہ بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں. ہونے لگی اذانیں کیسے سروں کو ڈھانپے، بازو بندھے ہوئے ہیں، خون رو رہی ہیں آنکھیں. آنکھوں کے خون سے رستے خون میں نہا رہے ہیں. کیا شام آ گیا ہے. محفظہ بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں. سجاد کا کلیجہ صد پاش ہو رہا ہے، ایک ایک زخم ان کا اس غم میں رو رہا ہے. زینب کا نام لے کے آدھا بلا رہے ہیں. کیا شام آ گیا ہے. محفظہ بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں. نیزے پہ جتنے سر ہیں ایک سر ہے ان میں ایسا، آنکھیں ہیں بند اس کی اور خاکی پر ہے گرتا. عباس کا یہ سر ہے تیور بتا رہے ہیں. کیا شام آ گیا ہے. محفظہ بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں. اتنا چلے ہیں پیدل کانٹوں پہ سارے قیدی، تھک جاتی چلتے چلتے چلتی اگر زمین بھی. پیروں کے آبلے بھی آنسو بہا رہے ہیں. کیا شام آ گیا ہے. محفظہ بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں. ہے لوگ کس طرح کے ہم سے دعا کرائیں، اے قیدیو دعا دو یہ دن نہ ہم پہ آئے. لے کر دعائیں ہم سے دل بھی دکھا رہے ہیں. क्या शाम आ गया है। अम्मा फिजा बता दे मुझको, पत्थर क्यों आ रहे हैं। माँओं के गोदियों से लिपटे हुए हैं बच्चे, है हाथ रस्सियों में माँओं के ऐसे झकरे। बच्चे जो गिर रहे हैं वो मरते जा रहे हैं। क्या शाम आ गया है। अम्मा फिजा बता दे मुझको, पत्थर क्यों आ रहे हैं। अम्मा फिजा बता दे मुझको, पत्थर क्यों आ रहे हैं। हम्मद वाल हम्मद सलवात।
محمد وآل محمد صلوات.
Sayyid Shabbir Kirmani, respected elders, brothers and sisters, Salaam Alaikum. Surah Fatiha is requested for the Saleh Sawab of Marhumin listed on the screen and for all Marhumin. Sawab al-Fatiha. Bismillah. Ayama Yujibu is requested for the names listed on the screen and for all those in need here and elsewhere. Let's recite 5 times Amma Yujibu. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma yujibul mustarra iza da'ahu wa yakshifu as-su'. أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ. اللهم صل على محمد. Join a committee. Volunteering opportunities are available at Masjid al-Hayy as our annual open invitation to all community members and especially the committee leaders and members to discuss and renew their commitment to their respective committees. Please refer to the email sent yesterday with more information. We look forward to seeing our community members sign up. Arafah Amal. On Friday, July 8th, after Jummah prayers, we'll be conducting Amal for the day of Arafah. The program will start at 3 p.m. and there will be a potluck iftar after Maghribain Salat. Eid program. On Saturday, July 9th, the Eid al-Adha program will start at 10:30 a.m. with Dua and Nutbah, after which Eid Salat will be held at 11 a.m. There will be a scrumptious brunch served after Ziyarat. Eid Brunch Fund As mentioned, we have a delicious brunch planned for Eid and have the Eid breakfast fund open for all those who would like to contribute towards it. Please contact Brother Jabir Chattu or Sister Batul Mukhi on the number on the screen, or you can donate online by going to the link on the screen. At this time, I would like to invite Sayyid Shabbir Kirmani to recite tonight's Majlis. Salawat ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. If you could please recite the Surah Al-Fatiha for the Marhameen of the Maulidina family, for your Marhameen, our Marhameen, for all those who do not have someone to recite a Fatiha for them. Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فوض أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل على محمد وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنما يغشى الله من عباده العلماء صدق الله العلي العظيم زينوا مجالسكم بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد. My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Iman here in Florida, across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question: what is excellence? We're told there's a moment in time a man is in the Masjid and he is gone elderly. And in the Masjid he is seeking and searching for someone, in the vicinity of the Masjid I should say. And at that point in time, due to his age, he has lost his sight, as the narration tells us. And as 1 hour passes and another, he seems to be searching for something, but he has not been able to find it. At one moment in time, in this advanced age, the same individual, he begins to notice something, he begins to hear something, he begins to be attentive to something. He begins to notice and hear some footsteps, he begins to hear a voice, he begins to hear and perceive something with his senses other than his eyes. And at that point in time, it is as if he perceives a young boy walking in front of him. And at that point in time, he says, "Young man, can you come closer?" And the young man approaches, or the young boy approaches. He says, "You walk like him, and you sound like him. Can I ask you, what is your name?" He says, "My name is Muhammad." He says, "Son of who?" He says, "Son of Ali." He says, "Son of who?" "Son of Hussein." He says, "Son of who?" "Son of Ali." "Son of who?" "Son of Abu Talib." At that point in time, he said, "This is the moment that I have been waiting for. This is the moment, and this is the individual that I've been searching for. You are that individual." And he looked towards this young boy and he says, "I convey unto you the salams of Rasulullah, the salams of the Holy Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam." Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa alihi. This man who had gone elderly, who had lost his sight, according to the narrations, was none other than the very famous companion Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, who was told by Rasulullah at a moment much earlier where he was in the vicinity of Rasulullah during the time of Rasulullah, and Rasulullah was with Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, who was young at the time. And at that time, Jabir was there, and Rasulullah says to Jabir, he says, "Oh Jabir, you will see the descendant of mine, who is my fifth descendant from the lineage of my son Hussein, convey unto him. You will notice that he has my name, and his walk and his demeanor and his talk will be like my name, and my talk and my walk and my demeanor." He says, "Convey unto him my salams." This is what Jabir, amongst his life, he was always seeking and searching to do. The first thing that comes forward when we come to understand the life of this blessed Imam, who we are trying to understand his life and glimpses of his life from tonight, is that the Prophet made a note to make sure that he is remembered by conveying this message to Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari. That means that this individual is noteworthy. Imagine in our world that if a president of the world, of the society, who's running society, sends sincere salutations and a message to an individual, will you and I not think that this person has some importance? Will you and I not think that this person has some value in society? Who is this person? Perhaps Rasulullah was drawing our attention to this idea, that who is this person? Have you thought about it? Have we thought about it? That he's not an ordinary individual. Therefore, in the brief moments that we have together, I want to look at a few things from the life of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. Number one, I want to look at what were his life and times, and what was the environment like during his time. How were things changing, and how were things going from the heart to the mind of Shiaism? And what does it mean to go from the heart to the mind of Shiaism? And how did Imam al-Baqir draw this bridge from the heart to the mind? Number one. Number two, what was the era and the rulership during that time? Who was ruling during the time of Imam al-Baqir? What were the Umayyads doing? And how is it that what was going on at that time may be very similar to what's going on in our world today? That certain things don't seem to change. And I'll explain that inshallah. The third thing, was the Imam endeavoring only in what we perceive and we call religious knowledge and religious sciences? Or did the Imam actually do other things? And what were those other things if he did? And what indication does that give us about the fourth thing that we'll look at is the future of our communities, the futures of our Imam Bargahs, the future of our Husainiyas, the future of our mosques and our masajids. That is, what was the vision of what the Ahlul Bayt had aspired to and they invited us towards, and where is it that perhaps we have drifted very far away from what they were actually seeking for us in terms of development, in terms of education, and ultimately the key word of tonight, in terms of excellence. And what guidance does that give us for the future? And the final thing that we'll inshallah commemorate and remember, the tragedy of this Imam who was an eyewitness to the tragedy of Karbala and a remembrance of that incident. This is what we will do tonight. Wherever you are, here in Florida, across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice from the bottom of your heart, send a salawat on Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. At the first level, Imam al-Baqir is that individual who is living and he is born in the 57th year of Hijrah, 57 AH, 57 years after the migration of the Prophet from Mecca towards Medina. Which means that at that time, when Karbala happened in the 61st year of Hijrah, 61 AH, the Imam was there. The Imam was roughly 3.5 years of age. Number one. Number two, how do you know and how do you remember these dates? It's often not easy to remember them, but remember one easy thing about Imam al-Baqir's year of birth is that he was born in the 57th year of Hijrah, 57, and he was also living, his age on this planet physically was also 57 years. That means if you do 57 plus 57 or 57 into 2, you realize that he left this world in 114 AH. And it's an easy way to remember that. Number one, this is that Imam who was there. His era and his period of imamat is roughly 19 years in that position of imamat, apparently. That is after his father left this world. So this is the time of the Imam. Now keep in mind, the movement of the Imams, I've told you in past lectures, I don't mean to repeat here, but just the takeaway messages, all the Imams had a common goal. And the common goal that they had was Hifzuddin wa Hifzuddima, preserving the religion, the deen, and the way of life, I should say, preserving the deen and preserving dima. Dima meaning blood. Preserving the faith and preserving the life of the faithful to mitigate loss of life, minimize loss of life, and to maximize this concept of the flourishing of the religion. So this is the first level. The second level is, when it came to the time of Amir al-Mu'minin had his methodology. Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam had his methodology where he had to ultimately sign the peace treaty, but eventually he was someone who was ready to fight, but the people were not supporting him. And Imam Hassan exposed Muawiyah. But remember, we said that the peace treaty of Imam Hassan is the sulah of not just Hassan, but the sulah of Hassanain. Reason being that when Imam Hassan left this world, for 10 years Imam Hussein abided by the peace treaty that his brother wrote. He didn't fight right away. So that tells us that when we say that Hussainis, that is Isna Ashari Shias, are always supposed to fight the way Imam Hussein did, that is not complete. That is the Zaydi narrative. That is not the Isna Ashari Shia narrative. The Isna Ashari Shia narrative is based on zaman and makan, based on time and space of where you are, in which era you are, and based on the common goal of Hifzuddin wa Hifzuddima, preserving the deen and preserving the faith. The Imam decides what is the proper procedure to take. Therefore, during the time of the fourth Imam, Imam Sajjad, the father of the Imam that we're commemorating, the Imam was in a state of heavy persecution. So what did he have to do? What did the fourth Imam have to do? The fourth Imam had to do a few things post Karbala. Number one, he had to make sure that he united the Shia community. Why? Because after Imam Hussein alayhi salam, there was some confusion even amongst the Shia community as to who will be the Imam. Why? Because remember, it's Imam Ali, father, Imam Hassan, son, then it's Imam Hussein, brother, not son again. So they didn't know at that time, will it be the son or will it be the brother? Now, the true Shias knew that Imam Ali, the Ahlul Bayt, had already said that after Hassan and Hussein, there will be no siblings that are Imams. There will be no brother. That hadith was known, but not everyone knew it. So there was Muhammad Hanafiya, according to some narrations, who was the uncle of Imam Sajjad, who had said that I am the Imam afterwards. And so number one, the Imam had to first prove his imamat in a way that he did not marginalize and push all the other Shias away. And so the decision was made through Hajr al-Aswad, and there's a long incident about that, which we talk about in Imam Sajjad. So the first element was he declared his imamat, number one. Number two, then he had to make sure he spreads the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt. But how do you do that in heavy persecution? It's not like the time of Imam Baqir, it's not like the time of Imam Sajjad. So how do you do it? He had to do it by means of the du'as of Sahifa Sajjadiyah. He had to do it through the teachings of Risalat al-Huquq, the Treaty of Rights. So indirectly the Imam was telling the people, these are du'as, but read the du'as to understand what is the substance of Islam. On one level, to know what is true Islam, and on the second level, to expose the tyrants. For example, with Risalat al-Huquq, that these are the treaties of rights. This is the rights of people. This is the rights of a father, a mother, a ruler, people who are ruled, the subjects. That means the rulership was not following. He was exposing them that they are not following the teachings of Islam. I'm writing the Charter of Rights. And the third thing that the Imam Sajjad had to do was he had to unite the Shia community. What did he use to unite the Shia community? He used the majlis of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. The masaib of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. That even at that time, if there were factions of Shiaism, people knew that in the martyrdom, in the mourning and the commemoration, that is when typically as human beings, insan, when we have difficulties, when we have rifts, when we have strife, when we have disagreements, there are some things that there is an honor code amongst humanity that even in those circumstances, human beings come together and say, this is bigger than our strife. Even if you read the history of criminals that were major criminals throughout the centuries, they would at least go to the funeral of their enemies. That is, mourning is above, that is, sorrow is above personalities. It's something, there's an honor code even amongst thieves that they say, and criminals. Similarly, at that time, even when there were strong differences amongst the Shia, when it came to the majlis of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, people said, no, we must mourn Hussein together. There is no white, black, right, wrong in this situation. We are here to commemorate the azab Shia of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Subhanallah, it's amazing how 1400 years pass and still we as human beings may not learn from the lessons that were there during the time of the Ahlul Bayt. Some things are better and bigger than me. Some things are bigger than you. Some things are bigger than us. The azah in mourning, there should be some understanding that Sayyid al-Shuhada, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is bigger than anything else. This was what the fourth Imam's time was. So this was the era of the heart of Shiaism. Imam al-Hussein and Imam Sajjad, the beating heart and the revival of the memory of Karbala and the emotional aspect that has kept people going. Now enters the time of Imam al-Baqir, where he lays the bridge from the heart to the mind of Shiaism, to the intellect of Shiaism. Does that mean that there was no mind and there was no brains and there was no intellect of Shiaism before Imam al-Baqir? No, of course not. There was. Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali is there before Imam al-Baqir. Rasulullah is there before Imam Ali alayhi salam. They are the brains, they are the minds, they are the most intellectual. But what we're saying is, when it came to the revival and it became an environment where you could propagate the true teachings of Islam, Imam al-Baqir re-established and repaved and relaid that foundation the same way Ibrahim alayhi salam rebuilt the Kaaba with his son, which was already there from before. This is what Imam al-Baqir did. He established this institution, number one. The second thing, what was going on during the time of the Imam? During the time of the Imam, one of the things that you will notice that was very prominent was, at that time, the rulers were the Umayyads, as you know. Umayyads, Uthman, the first Umayyad ruler, then Muawiyah is the second, according to that. And then eventually there was Yazid, and afterwards there were others who came in that line. Ultimately, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is also in the Umayyad line, Umar the second. Now what's very important is, even after Imam al-Hussein, after the tragedy of Karbala, Waqat al-Harra happens. That is, the pillaging of, for example, Medina happens. The pillaging of Mecca happens. Yazid sends armies, he sends an army to attack Medina and Mecca, as you know, historically. And many things happen. And the rulers, many of them, most of them were not any better after that, the likes of Yazid. You will find, for the example, except for Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, except for Umar II. And you will find, for example, people were saying that, for example, they were reciting and leading salah, as you know, historically, the history of the Umayyads. They were leading, for example, namaz, for example, Jum'ah salah, as you know, according to some rulers, Jum'ah salah, some khulafa, because they had made the Khalifa also the religious authority. So at that point in time, he's going and he's leading Jum'ah salah on Wednesday. I remember there was a big conference, and they asked, what would happen? The line of the whole conference, that they invited Shia and Sunni scholars. This happened in India many years ago. And the conference's title was that Karbala na hoti to kya hota? What would happen if Karbala didn't happen? And at that point in time, there was speaker after speaker after speaker, and each one of them was going on a long, long lecture. Now imagine, the lecture time, people are going, and already many people don't care about time. They didn't have any time left. The whole time of the conference has passed by. Everything has gone by. There's no time left. The last keynote speaker who was left to speak was Ali Naqi Naqavi, who's known as Naqan Sahab, who was one of these top scholars, who was one of the last mujtahids, they say, from the subcontinent, who lived in India. Very, very well-established scholar, who was also at Aligarh Muslim University. He was supposed to be speaking, and he comes in this conference, and they said, Agha, Sayyid, we're so sorry, we don't have any time. He says, I don't need any time. Maybe he was supposed to speak the most. He said, I don't need 30 minutes, I need 30 seconds. I said, what? He said, you need 30 seconds? He said, I just need 30 seconds, my whole message is in one line, I don't need to give a long speech. So he gets up to the podium, and they think, what is he going to say? If Karbala didn't happen, what would happen? So the line, because they had given this line to everyone, and everyone did their speech based on this line. Their whole speech was, what would happen in Islam if Karbala didn't happen? So he gets there, and they're saying, this big scholar who's the keynote speaker gets there, and he gets to the front of the line, and he stands in front of the podium, and he looks at the crowd. He says, Agar Karbala na hoti, to Budh ke din Juma namaz hoti. And he left. He said, if Karbala did not happen, then Jum'ah Salah would happen on Wednesdays. It would not happen on Fridays. That is how upside down Islam had gotten during the time of the Umayyads. That is, what was halal had become haram. The days of the week had become distorted. That is, anyone knows that Jum'ah means Friday. Friday prayers happens on Friday. These drunkards, he was drunk, he was reciting the prayer on a Wednesday, Jum'ah Salah, that the Quran is telling you to recite this prayer on Fridays. This is how upside down and toppled this happened. How did this happen? One of the ways that this happened was because of quote-unquote ulama, scholars. And you will find that much of the dynamics that were happening, and it hurts my heart to say this, much of what was happening at that time is still going on today. And unless and until we as a community, nationally, globally and wherever my voice is reaching, don't seriously take removing conflicts of interest in our community from the minbar to the ground floor and back until we don't make sure we ensure that the dynamics of the community, true knowledge is being disseminated and there are no conflicts of interest. Many conflicts of interest which I've told you about before. Until those things are not eradicated and eliminated, we will live in very difficult times. I've told you, what was the verse that I began with? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. إِنَّمَا يَغْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when He defines and when He describes the alim, the scholar, what does He say? He says the scholar is the one, إِنَّمَا يَغْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. The alim in the eyes of Allah is the one who verily has the khashya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their hearts. That is the fear, the cognizance, the ma'rifah. The principle that this ayah tells us according to the ulama is, as an alim, according to the Islamic definition, as they get more knowledge, they don't get more arrogant, they get more humble. Principle. The element of the equation is there. So one should not come forward and say that, for example, anyone who's on the pursuit of knowledge should not come forward and say that, for example, I've studied this much and I've studied this long and I know everything and you don't know anything. Or for example, my qualifications are more than you and therefore, we need to figure out a way to follow the principles of Islam in the truest sense, but also make sure we democratize things to make sure that knowledge is attainable by everyone. I remember growing up, some people used to come from abroad, and you'd ask them a question, they would get upset. Not everyone, by the way. Not every Maulana is like this. Not every alim is like this. But one thing that we need to really figure out is, how do we get the whole community together and move forward? And one lesson that we learn from the life of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam is to make sure that you follow excellence in every domain of life. And I'll explain that in a moment. But one thing that was going on during the time of Imam al-Baqir was people were coming forward, scholars, and they were doing whatever the rulership wanted them to do. The rulership wanted them to twist the beliefs in their favor. For example, one thing was, find a way. The rulers would say, find a way to keep me in the seat of power. So they would sign these checks and pay these big bills to these so-called scholars, the court scholars, so to speak. That's why the poet says that line which I often mention to you, Jisko bhi sheikh o shah ne hukme khuda diya qarar, हमने नहीं किया वो काम हाँ बखुदा नहीं किया और निस्बत इल्म है बहुत हाकिम वक्त को अजीज उसने तो कार जहल भी बे उलमा नहीं किया. The poet says that whatever the sheikh and the shah said together, I never did that thing. That is the ruling party and the scholar of the ruling party. Whatever they said together, I never did it. Why? Because there's a conflict of interest. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling me in the Quran to speak out against Fir'aun. He's telling Musa, speak out against Fir'aun. He's telling Ibrahim, speak out against Namrud. He's telling his representatives, speak out against the ruler. And I'm seeing in the Muslim world and the history of Islam that the ruler and the scholar is getting together and sitting together next to each other. This is in direct contradiction to what Allah wanted in the Quran, what Allah is stating in the Quran. Unless the ruler has taqwa, like Sulaiman, like Dawood, like the representatives of Allah who were given a position of authority. Those are the exception. So now coming to the life of Imam al-Baqir, these scholars are trying to interpret and they're trying to draw new meanings in their own basis. For example, what is one thing, one debate? One thing that rose up during the time of Imam al-Baqir, this ruler, this scholar, he comes forward and says that you can make analytical deduction. You can make your own, use your own rai. You can use your own views. Now you can use your own views, but you have to use it within certain parameters. This is something that came during the era of Imam al-Baqir and Imam al-Sadiq very clearly. What happens? These so-called scholars, they begin to say that this ruling, you can come forward and use your analytical deduction. Remember, in fiqh, when it comes to our belief system, according to Muslims, there are a few things that are used to derive the law of Allah. Number one, Quran. Number two, hadith of the Rasulullah and the Ahlul Bayt, from our perspective. And then there is something called ijma, consensus. This is common amongst all Muslims. That is, the first level being the Quran, then the Hadith, and then Ijma, consensus, common amongst all three. The one thing that we differ on, Shi'as, we believe in Dalilul Aql, that is, ration or reason, whereas our brothers in Ahl Sunnah, they use Qiyas. Qiyas is what the Ahlul Bayt told us, the first one to do Qiyas was Shaitan. where Shaitan said that you are asking me to bow down to Adam, whereas I'm made from fire and he's made from clay. And here's the qiyas. He says that fire is greater than clay. He deduced that. Did Allah say that? Not necessarily. Now, this same issue arose during the time of Imam al-Baqir. When this happened, in the time of Imam, who are known as Baqirain also, or Sadiqain, Imam Baqir and Imam al-Sadiq. So at that time, the Imam asked him, he says, let me ask you a question, he says to the scholar. What has more sawab, what has more ajr, or what has more importance? Namaz or roza? Namaz or fasting? Salah or Saum? Which one? He says, verily, Salah. Salah has more priority, more significance. Okay. So what's a worse sin? To kill someone, to kill an innocent person, murder, is that worse, or zina? Adultery. He said, of course, murder. They're both bad, but murder is worse. Then the Imam looks at him, he says, then why is it that in the case of prayers, when it comes to salah, and a woman, a lady, is in a particular state, when it comes to the salah, she does not have to make up the salah, but when it comes to the fasting, she has to make up the fasting? He didn't have an answer. And then when it came to the other issue, when it came to, for example, the matter of murder versus zina, he says, then why is it that when it comes to murder, you need 2 witnesses, and when it comes to adultery, you need 4 witnesses? He didn't have an answer. Now, bear in mind, the Imam is not saying what we sometimes think, that Imam is saying that, oh, when it comes to fasting and it comes to Saum, that the Imam is disproving the person and saying that fasting is afdal, and the Imam is saying in the other circumstance that no, zina or adultery is worse than murder. The Imam says, you are right, but you don't have an answer for me. Why? He says the reason is that you have done qiyas in this issue. You have tried to deduce on your own basis, on your own reasoning as to what you think is the criteria, but you do not know why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said so. The same example of later, this same Imam's children, the later Imams, what we'll come to in a few nights, when it was asked, when a person wrote a book called Contradictions in the Quran, the Imam said, just ask him one question. Go to him and ask him one question, just say one thing. Say to him that, is it possible that an author writes a book and you derive an interpretation of what he meant, and what he meant was different than what you derived? Just ask him that, that's it. And then he put the whole book in the river. The Imam said the reason as to why, when it comes to these 2 things, when it comes to fasting and it comes to prayer, why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not require that a lady make sure that she makes up the prayer, because there were 5 prayers in the day, where there is 1 fast in the day. That is, that 5 prayers will add up very quickly. It will become a very hefty amount of prayers that need to be made up. Whereas the fast can be done in 1 instance or 1 go, and it is not throughout the year, throughout the time. It's so as to not burden the individual, number 1. And he said when it came to the issue of murder and adultery, it has nothing to do what you think and what you're saying. It is because of how many people are involved in the act. He says, what do you mean? He said, when it comes to murder, it's 1 person who is there who has committed the act. If you see him doing it, that individual doing it, that is enough. But when it comes to the issue of adultery, there are at least 2 people that are there in the action. You need to make sure that you have 2 witnesses per individual. That's why it's 4 witnesses. And so he was spellbound. So the Imam is using his intellect and his rationale to answer the scholars apparently of the time, who are not really scholars, but they were trying to twist the world. There's so much to say, but inshallah we'll try to condense very quickly. Very quickly. This Imam, what lesson should you and I take? He solved the biggest issue of the time, which was the economic currency minting problem of the time. The Byzantians, the people of Rome, controlled the currency of the time. You know cryptocurrencies, you know these digital currencies today? It's a big issue because currency has been controlled by governments for centuries, and they use power to control it. And the same thing was going on at the time. The Romans had a monopoly. When this problem had to be solved, it was solved by Imam al-Baqir, number 1. Number 2, when it came to the issue of this individual, this Imam is working in the field. A man comes and he says, I wish to advise Imam Baqir, but he advised me. What happened? He was passing by and he saw Imam Baqir working in the fields. When he saw Imam Baqir working in the fields, he says, you're going after this dunya. If you die in the state, what will happen? 1-line answer. Imam Baqir looks back at him and he says, if I die in this state working and obtaining a halal risk, I will die in a state of ibadah. Number one, Imam solves the mint and financial problem of the society. Number two, he says that working is worship. It's not what you and I think to going after this dunya, if it has the right intent and the right goals. And the third thing, the Imam is in a gathering during the time of Hisham ibn Abdul Hakam, who's the ruler of the time, and he has a gathering. When he has a gathering, he wants to try to say, this Imam, in our words, forgive me, he's just a nerd. He's just someone who's always reading, an intellectual. He's not someone who's like an athlete, or today's time, someone who's successful. So they used to do events, and one of the events they used to do was archery. So they said, oh, Ibn Rasulullah, we have this archery going on in this gathering. He said, like, why don't you just participate? Trying to ridicule the Imam, that he knows books. What does he know about this? He says, no, I don't have to do this. It's okay, you guys can go ahead. He says, no, we insist. Imam Baqir comes, he says, very well. He takes the bow, he takes the arrow, he takes an aim for the target, lets go of the arrow, bullseye, first shot. He said, beginner's luck. He said, try another one. He takes another one, lets go, second arrow pierces the first. He said, what? So third time's the charm. He gave him a third arrow. He let go, it pierced the third one. 9 arrows like this, one pierced the other. They all hit the bullseye. He said, that's enough, you can go now, this is okay. It's enough embarrassment for us. Principle, Imams were not just religious knowledge as you and I say. They were comprehensive people who were going after excellence in life. Excellence in archery. That's why the tradition of the Ahlul Bayt says, make sure you teach your children 3 things. Make sure you teach them horse riding and swimming and archering. Baba, I thought Islam was about making sure that you're just praying day and night. Do us as parents, do we put as much emphasis on, for example, archery and horse riding and swimming as we do, for example, on other things, such as namaz and roza? I'm not saying namaz and roza is not important, it's very important. But what about the other things the Ahlul Bayt say? Final thing that we'll leave here, inshallah, with is this. Look, we have to seriously think about what is the value that the mosque, the Husayniyah, the Imam Barga of the future is adding. We may have thought, based on the understanding of the past, that Islam was just prayers, amal, and just checking the boxes. But when you study the life of Imam Baqir and the other Imams, you may realize that in our future, we need to make sure that we are creating circles within our mosques and our Husayniyahs that help our students get into the top Ivy League institutions. The Harvards, the Columbias, the MITs of the world, for example. That is not in contradiction to Islam if you go with Iman. Why would it be? Is it not that every scholar throughout history, Ahl Sunnah, not Shia, has said, the Ahlul Bayt, if they were known for anything, they were known for knowledge? You don't think that Imam Baqir, you don't think that Imam Sadiq would be running the top institutions today if they were? Most definitely they would. Number one. Number two, we should make sure that there are circles to help our youth in entrepreneurship based on what the Imam's guidance was. If I die now, I'm dying in a state of ibadah. What do you think Islam is? And number three, we should encourage them towards even excellence in athletics, being the top. And in that you will find that when Rasulullah invited people in the beginning of Islam, he used dawat-e-zul ashira, he gave them food. Food is part of the sunnah of Rasulullah. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala invited you to do ibadah, He said, I will give you, if you do this, I will give you Jannah. What is the incentive for our next generation today? You have to think about that and really think, what is it that can get them in the door to add value to their lives? And through that give doses of Islam. Islam is excellence in academia, excellence in education, excellence in development. That is true Islam. It's not just coming and doing amal, and although that's all important, every voice in our community needs to be heard and understood, otherwise we're losing people. There's many things to say. This Imam al-Baqir is also that individual who, after the tragedy of Karbala, he's that one who has a very famous moment that is often not mentioned by the scholars, which is what? He is in the vicinity, he is in the darbar of Sham after the tragedy of Karbala. And the tyrant and the zalim comes forward and he says that these women who are there, and these children, these women and children, half of them I will sell off, and half of them I will take in slavery, in servitude. And they say a young Imam al-Baqir, who is hardly 4 years of age, he stands up and says that you are worse than Fir'aun. He says, worse than, they're shocked, who is this? He says, worse than Fir'aun? He says, when Fir'aun, at the time of Fir'aun, when Fir'aun was doing dhulm on Banu Israel, Musa and Harun, when he was doing what he did, he asked the courtmen, he asked the people of the court, what should I do with them? And they responded, send them away, exile them, kick them out of town. They didn't say kill them. At least Fir'aun asked the people, and at least he exiled them. You are not even asking the people, and you are putting some of them to death. How could you? How dare you? Are selling them and doing this with them? In an environment where the people in the court wanted to make sure that the women were protected. Even some of the dignitaries were saying, what are you doing? Why are you disrespecting the family of your own prophet? He was not listening. He said, what's your name, young boy? He says, my name is Muhammad. He says, son of who? Son of Ali. Son of who? Son of Hussein. He says, you are the son of Ali ibn al-Hussein? He said, yes, I thought we killed Ali ibn al-Hussein. He said, that was another Ali ibn al-Hussein. This was Imam Baqir at that age. Imam al-Baqir, the narrations say that the ruler of the time, Hisham ibn Abdul Malik, he had the order to poison the Imam. Do you know how he poisoned the Imam? According to narrations, they say that he had a saddle. You know the saddle that goes on a horse? He had poison laced in the saddle. And he had it ordered that is given to the Imam. They had the Imams go on the saddle and sit on the saddle. And they had it such that this would rub against the skin of the Imam. And over days, this poison seeped into the blood of the Imam. And the Imam began to tremble from the poison. It was affecting the body of Imam al-Baqir. And at that moment, he is with his son, Imam al-Sadiq. He is given his ghusl. He is given his kafan. He is buried in al-Baqir. How tragic is the story of Imam al-Baqir, that till this day we are not able to put a grave, a mausoleum over the grave of Imam al-Baqir. But perhaps if you were to remember and you were to say this to Imam al-Baqir, he would perhaps look back at us and say, had you been in Karbala, had you been there in that moment when my father Sayyid al-Sajjad, he comes towards Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari and they meet on the Arba'in. Azadaro do jumle कहते हैं जब जाबिर और इमाम सज्जाद मिले, जाबिर ने हाल पूछा, इमाम सज्जाद ने कहा ए जाबिर ना पूछो, कहते हैं कि आशूरे के बाद शाम गरीबा हुई, ए जाबिर उन्होंने जालिमों ने अशकिया ने कहा कि घोड़े दौड़ा दिए जाएं। जाबिर सुनो, तमाम लोग अपने शुहदा, अपने अज़्ज़ा, अपने अकारिब के लाशें ले चले। एक हुसैन इब्न अली करबला की रेती पर थे, घोड़ों की टापों से लाशे इमाम हुसैन। अला लानतुल्लाहि अलल कौम ज़ालिमीन व सयअलमु अल्लज़ीना ज़लमू अय्युम मुनक़लिबिन यन्क़लिबून। Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Ya Allah, we ask you to accept this ibadah. Ya Allah, we ask you to learn from the lives of the Imam. We ask you to learn from the life of Imam Baqir. We ask you to allow us to learn from the excellence of Imam al-Baqir in the various domains of knowledge, of intellect, of archery, of finance, of development, of economics. We ask you to allow us to learn from his life. Ya Allah, we ask you to allow our next generation to be better believers than us, to allow our next generation to be stronger in their faith and stronger in their success than us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to alleviate the suffering of all those who are suffering in this world and to allow us to be a vehicle of the alleviation of their suffering. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the reappearance of Imam Sahib al-Zaman and to allow us to be amongst his companions when he returns. A final request to please recite the Surah al-Fatiha for the marhumin of the Maulidina family, your marhumin, our marhumin, and for all those who do not have someone to recite the Fatiha for them in this night. Surah al-Mubarak al-Fatiha ma'as salawat. Allahumma salam. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين ماتم يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين.
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. बाज़ार के मंजर को और अपने खुले सर को بھولی نہیں میں بازار کے منظر کو اور اپنے کھلے سر کو بھولی نہیں میں بازار کے منظر کو اور اپنے بھولی نہیں میں اپنے بندے ہاتھوں کو بیماری کے زیور کو بھولی نہیں میں بازار کے منظر کو اور سر کو بھولی نہیں میں اٹھتی ہوئی آندھی کو محشت کو بیاباں کو چھپتے ہوئے سورج کو تاریکی کو میدان کو چلتے ہوئے خنجر کو نیزے پہ تیرے سر کو بھولی نہیں میں بازار کے منظر کو اور اپنے کھلے سر کو بھولی نہیں میں بازار کے
منظر کو اور اپنے کھلے سر کو
بھولی نہیں میں ایک چاند تھا بدلی میں چھپتا تھا نکلتا تھا پردہ در خیمہ کا اٹھتا کبھی گرتا تھا وہ خیمہ لیلا سے ہائے رخصت اکبر کو بھولی نہیں میں بازار کے منظر کو اور اپنے کھلے سر کو بھولی نہیں میں بازار کے منظر کو
اور اپنے کھلے سر کو
بھولی نہیں میں یاد آتا ہے کہ ماں کا وہ خاک میں دس جانا اور آگ کے شعلوں میں وہ ماں کا جھلس جانا جلتے ہوئے جھولے سے لپٹی ہوئی مادر کو بھولی نہیں میں بازار کے منظر کو اور اپنے
کھلے سر کو
بھولی نہیں میں بازار کے منظر کو اور اپنے
کھلے سر کو
بھولی نہیں میں معصوم سکینہ کو برتے ہوئے نیزوں کو سستے ہوئے گالوں کو بے رحم تماچوں کو سستے ہوئے کانوں کو کھنچتے ہوئے گوہر کو بھولی نہیں میں بازار کے منظر کو
اور اپنے
کھلے سر کو بھولی نہیں میں بازار کے منظر کو
اور اپنے کھلے سر کو
بھولی نہیں میں ہے آج بھی وہ گریا ہے آج بھی وہ زاری ہے آج بھی پتھر کے سینے سے لہو جاری روتے ہوئے پتھر کو پتھر پہ رکھے سر کو بھولی نہیں میں بازار کے منظر کو اور اپنے
کھلے سر کو
بھولی نہیں میں بازار کے منظر کو اور اپنے
کھلے سر کو
بھولی نہیں میں اپنے بندے ہاتھوں کو بیماری کے زیور کو भूली नहीं मैं बाजार के मंजर को और अपने खुले सर को भूली नहीं मैं رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين يا علي بن أبي طالب السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى السلام عليك يا حسين شهيد بكربلاء السلام عليكم جميعا شهداء كربلاء ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا علي بن الحسين زين العابدين السلام عليك يا محمد بن علي الباقر السلام عليك يا جعفر بن محمد الصادق السلام عليك يا موسى بن جعفر الكاذب السلام عليك يا علي بن موسى الرضا السلام عليك يا محمد بن علي الجواد السلام عليك يا علي بن محمد النقي السلام عليك يا حسن بن علي العسكري السلام عليك يا حجة الله يا ابن الحسن يا صاحب الأسر والزمان سيدي الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم كن لوليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين